The morning sun casts long shadows across the Forum Boreum, Rome's ancient cattle market that now serves a different purpose, where livestock once stood. Human beings await their fate. A boy of perhaps 16 stands on the wooden platform, his wrists bound not with iron chains, but silk cords, a detail that speaks volumes about his intended purpose. His name was Marcus once, in the village where his father grew olives. But names are luxuries that slaves cannot afford. The auctioneer's voice rings out, describing not his skills or strength, but his youth, his unblemished skin, his Syrian, features that Romans find so exotic. Below, wealthy men in purple-striped togas examine him with the calculating eyes of those purchasing not a person but an investment. The buyer who finally claims him is Lucius Aurelius, a senator whose wealth comes from estates across 3 provinces. Aurelius doesn't speak to the boy directly. Why would he? Instead, he discusses the purchase with his freedman assistant, commenting on the boy's potential while standing close enough that the child can smell the expensive oils in his beard. The price paid is equivalent to what a common laborer might earn in 20 years, a sum that reflects not the boy's humanity, but his market value as an object of desire. The transaction complete, the boy follows his new master through streets where citizens avoid looking directly at them, everyone understanding, but no one acknowledging what has just occurred. The Aurelius household occupies an entire block near the Palatine Hill, its marble facades hiding courtyards within courtyards, each space carefully designed to display wealth and control access. The boy is led not to the slave quarters where household servants sleep, but to a separate wing where the walls are painted with scenes from Greek myths, Zeus and Ganymede, Apollo and Hyacinth, stories that normalize what happens here through divine precedent. He meets others like himself, young men whose eyes hold the peculiar emptiness of those who have learned that survival requires the death of hope. An older companion, a Greek who has survived 5 years in this household, explains the unspoken rules. Never meet the master's eyes unless commanded. Always appear grateful, even eager. Learn to read moods like a sailor reads whether your safety depends on it. Forget whatever name you had before. You are whatever the master chooses to call you. The Greek's voice carries no emotion as he speaks, as if feeling itself has become too dangerous to maintain. He shows the newcomer the small chamber that will be his, luxurious by slave standards, with a real bed and even a window, but also equipped with a lock that only works from the outside. The daily routine begins before dawn. Bathing is mandatory and extensive, involving oils and scrapers and perfumes that cost more than most Romans see in a lifetime. Their bodies are not their own to neglect or maintain. According to preference, they are canvases that must always be prepared for display. Exercise follows, carefully calibrated to maintain an aesthetic that Romans associate with youth and beauty. Lean, but not gaunt, toned but not muscular like common laborers. The trainer, himself a former companion now too old for his original purpose, guides them through movements designed not for strength or health but for appearance. Education occupies the middle hours of the day, but this is not the education of free Romans preparing for public life. They learn to recite poetry they will never write, to discuss philosophy they will never truly study, to play instruments that will accompany others' pleasures. The teacher, a bitter freedman who earned his liberty through years of similar service, drills them in the art of conversation, how to be clever but not too clever, amusing but never overshadowing their master, cultured enough to entertain but never forgetting their place. Every lesson carries the subtext: you exist to enhance another's life, never to live your own. The senator returns from the forum in late afternoon, and a household's atmosphere shifts like air before a storm. The young men know to make themselves visible but not obvious, available but not presumptuous. Today, Aurelius chooses the new boy, summoning him with a gesture that brooks no hesitation. What happens in the master's chambers varies. Sometimes it's merely companionship, someone to listen while the senator complains about political rivals or drinks too much wine. Other times, the boy returns to his chamber moving carefully, his face a mask that the others recognize and never comment upon. Not all wealthy Romans who purchase young male companions are overtly cruel. Some convince themselves they are benefactors. providing education and comfort to boys who might otherwise starve. Senator Gaius Maximus, who owns 3 such companions, speaks at dinner parties about the civilizing influence of Roman culture on barbarian youth. He doesn't see the irony in discussing civilization while keeping human beings as inanimate property. His companions learn to perform gratitude so convincingly that sometimes even they almost believe it, because the alternative, acknowledging their complete powerlessness, would make survival impossible. He training schools that prepare young men for this life operate throughout the empire, though Rome itself hosts the most prestigious. The one run by Quintus Flavius occupies a compound near the Campus Martius, its high walls keeping the curious out and the students in. Boys arrive here through various routes, some sold by desperate families, others captured in war, many simply stolen from their homes by traders who know the market value of youth and beauty. The youngest are perhaps 12, the oldest rarely more than 20, because the market demands a specific type of innocence that age inevitably erases. The curriculum of these schools would seem bizarre if it weren't so calculatingly cruel. Students learn to walk in a way that suggests availability without seeming wanton. They practice facial expressions in mirrors, how to look pleased but not happy, interested but not eager, sad but not depressed. They study the preferences of different types of masters. New money wants sophistication. Old families prefer traditional Greek culture. Military men desire something else entirely. The instruction is clinical, stripping away personality to create blank slates onto which masters can project their desires. Physical conditioning at these schools goes beyond simple exercise. Boys undergo treatments to remove body hair, as smooth skin is associated with youth and femininity in Roman culture. Their diets are strictly controlled enough to maintain health, but not enough to develop adult musculature. Some undergo more extreme modifications, procedures that ensure they will never fully develop adult characteristics. The trainers speak of these interventions as investments, increasing the long-term value of their products. No one asks the boys what they think. Their opinions matter as little as those of the cattle once sold in the same market. The psychological conditioning is perhaps more damaging than the physical training. Boys are taught that their previous lives never existed, that their families are dead to them, that their only identity is what their future masters provide. They learn through repetition and punishment that resistance leads to pain, compliance to relative comfort. The smarter ones realize early that the school is breaking them deliberately, but understanding the process doesn't make it any less effective. By the time they're sold, most have learned to suppress not just resistance, but the very thought of resistance. The economics driving this system reach from the highest levels of Roman society to the furthest corners of the empire. A successful trader in young men can earn more in a year than most merchants see in a lifetime. The trade routes that bring silk and spices to Rome also carry human cargo. Boys selected for specific characteristics that will appeal to Roman buyers. Germanic youth bring high prices for their fair coloring, Syrians for their dark eyes, Greeks for their supposed cultural refinement. The traders speak their own coded language at markets, using terms for wine and pottery while everyone understands they're discussing human beings. Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest slave traders, maintains detailed records that survive in fragmentary form. His ledgers record boys by origin, age, and particular qualities, with prices that fluctuate based on market demand. A note mentions that prices rise before major festivals, when wealthy Romans want to display their newest acquisitions. Another entry calculates the cost of maintaining boys in holding facilities versus the risk of their value decreasing with age. These documents reduce human suffering to simple mathematics. Profit margins written in the misery of children. The families torn apart by this trade rarely appear in Roman records, but their grief echoes through occasional references. A letter from a Roman administrator in Syria mentions local unrest after too many young men were taken for the Italian market. A gravestone in Germania bears an inscription from parents to a son, taken across the sea, a euphemism everyone would have understood. Entire communities learned to hide their most beautiful children when Roman traders appeared, knowing that beauty had become a curse that could steal their sons forever. In the household of Senator Aurelius, the boy who was once Marcus has learned to navigate his new existence. He knows which servants pity him and which resent him for living in relative luxury. He's learned that the master's wife pretends he doesn't exist, while their teenage son watches him with an interest that promises future complications. He's discovered that certain household positions offer protection. The master's current favorite faces fewer random cruelties from other staff, but he's also learned that favoritism is temporary, and that aging even slightly means losing the only protection available. The other companions in the household have developed their own survival strategies. The Greek maintains his position through intellectual conversation, having made himself indispensable as a secretary as well as companion. Another boy, a Gaul, survives through absolute submission, never showing personality that might remind anyone he's human. A third tried to escape once. The scars on his back serve as a warning to others. They don't speak of that night, but sometimes the boy who was Marcus sees him staring at nothing, reliving whatever punishment taught him that freedom was impossible. Resistance takes subtle forms. In such circumstances, a companion might deliberately spill wine on important documents, causing minor inconvenience to their master. They share information through glances and coded phrases, warning each other of dangers or opportunities. Some maintain secret religious practices, praying to gods their masters have never heard of, finding comfort in beliefs that insist they are more than property. These small acts of defiance seem meaningless against the weight of their oppression, but they serve a crucial purpose, reminding the boys that somewhere inside, a person still exists. The senator's dinner parties showcase the complex social dynamics surrounding these young men. They serve wine and food, but everyone understands their true purpose is decorative and potentially more. Guests make jokes about Aurelius's collection, comparing boys like wine vintages. The companions must smile at these comments, must appear pleased to be noticed, must perform their availability while hoping not to be chosen for additional services. The wives present steadfastly ignore them, maintaining the fiction that their husband's ownership of beautiful boys is merely a status symbol, like expensive statuary. One evening, a visiting philosopher speaks eloquently about the nature of virtue and the importance of treating all humans with dignity. The same man later corners one of the younger companions in an alcove, his hands conveying a message that contradicts his earlier words. This hypocrisy permeates Roman society. Public morality that condemns excess while private behavior reveals the truth. The boy escapes only because another guest wants to discuss Stoic philosophy with the philosopher. But he knows such reprieves are temporary. The aging process terrifies every companion. Though they rarely speak of it, they watch older boys disappear from the household, sold to lesser owners, relegated to common slavery, or simply vanishing with no explanation. A companion's value peaks between 14 and 20. After that, they become reminders of mortality that wealthy Romans prefer to avoid. Some masters pension off longtime companions with small allowances or positions as freedmen, but these are exceptions. Most face futures as common slaves, their years of specialized training useless for practical labor. The documentation of this system exists in fragments that historians must piece together carefully. Graffiti from Pompeii includes crude drawings and inscriptions that reference the trade in young men. Legal documents outline ownership transfers and prices. Medical texts describe procedures performed on boys to maintain their youthful appearance. Poetry and satire make oblique references to practices everyone understood, but few discussed openly. These scattered pieces form a mosaic of systematic exploitation that operated for centuries beneath Rome's celebrated civilization. Archaeological evidence provides silent testimony to these forgotten lives. Excavations of wealthy Roman houses reveal small chambers near master bedrooms, equipped with locks and decorated with particular artistic themes. Burial sites sometimes contain remains of young men, interred with expensive goods, but no identifying inscriptions, suggesting lives valued in life but forgotten in death. A collection of writing tablets found in Britain includes what appears to be a companion's practice exercises, copying poetry with occasional personal notes scratched in margins. Mother would not recognize me. Now and has it been 3 years? Or 4? The training school run by Quintus Flavius receives a new shipment of boys from the eastern provinces. Among them is a child who refuses to speak, who must be forced to eat, who stares at trainers with undisguised hatred. The standard conditioning techniques fail. Beatings only strengthen his resistance. Finally, they assign him to an older student, himself once rebellious, who explains in the boy's native language that resistance only increases suffering. The child listens and slowly begins to comply, but his eyes never lose their fire. The trainers mark him as problematic, likely to sell at a discount to masters who prefer spirited boys to break personally. Economic records from the period reveal the enormous wealth generated by this trade. A successful dealer might own ships, specifically designed to transport human cargo, with holds modified to carry boys in conditions that preserve their appearance and value. Insurance documents detail coverage for losses during transport, calculating the monetary value of human lives with actuarial precision. Tax records show that the imperial government collected significant revenue from these transactions, making the state complicit in the exploitation. The paradox of Roman law regarding these young men reflects society's uncomfortable relationship with the practice. Legally, they were property, with no more rights than furniture. Yet numerous laws regulated their treatment, suggesting acknowledgement of their humanity even while denying it officially. Masters could be fined for excessive cruelty that damaged their property, but the definition of excessive was so extreme that prosecution rarely occurred. A companion who killed his master faced automatic execution, but a master who killed his companion might only face social disapproval if the act was particularly wasteful. In the Aurelius household, a new dynamic emerges when the senator's son, now 18, receives his own companion as a coming-of-age gift. The boy selected is barely 14, trembling as he's presented like a wrapped package. The senator's son, raised in the system, accepts the gift as naturally as he would a new horse. Yet privately, he feels uncomfortable with the power he now holds, though he'd never admit such weakness. The new boy must navigate not just one master but two, each with different expectations and demands. The comparison between these companions and the hetairai of ancient Greece reveals how Rome adapted and industrialized earlier forms of exploitation. Where Greek culture at least acknowledged the intellectual and artistic contributions of educated companions, Rome reduced them to pure property. A Greek symposium might feature genuine philosophical discussion with hetairai as participants. A Roman dinner party used boys as silent decoration, speaking only when commanded to recite poetry or play music for entertainment. Religious festivals provided no respite from service. During Saturnalia, when traditional roles supposedly reversed, companions found themselves even more vulnerable as alcohol and license removed what few boundaries normally existed. The festival of Lupercalia, with its emphasis on fertility and sexuality, became an occasion for masters to display their collections publicly. These religious observations, meant to honor gods and strengthen community bonds, became additional venues for exploitation and display. The physical toll of this life manifested in various ways. Medical texts from the period describe ailments common among companions, digestive issues from irregular eating patterns, designed to maintain specific body types, joint problems from enforced postures, and what modern medicine would recognize as symptoms of chronic stress and trauma. Roman physicians treated these symptoms without acknowledging their causes, prescribing remedies that addressed physical manifestations while ignoring the psychological wounds that produced them. Some companions found unexpected allies within households. Occasionally, a master's wife might show kindness, seeing in these boys the sons taken from other mothers. Elderly slaves sometimes offered protection in exchange for small services. Children of the household, not yet fully indoctrinated into the system, might treat companions as friends before learning this was inappropriate. These small kindnesses, rare as they were, provided glimpses of humanity that helped some maintain their sanity. The underground economy that developed around the system included services Romans never officially acknowledged. Physicians specialized in procedures to maintain youthful appearance. Merchants sold specific cosmetics and treatments. Teachers offered private lessons in skills that would help boys transition to other roles as they aged. Even fortune tellers found clientele among desperate companions seeking any hope for their futures. This shadow economy profited from misery while occasionally providing genuine assistance. Escape attempts, though rare, did occur. The boy who was Marcus learns of one who made it as far as the port at Ostia before being caught. The punishment was severe enough that details were never shared, but the message was clear, yet knowing that someone tried, that escape was at least conceivable, planted seeds of possibility. Maps were memorized, coins hidden, allies identified among traders who might be bribed. Most never acted on these plans, but the planning itself provided a sense of agency in lives otherwise entirely controlled. The complexity of relationships between companions reveals humanity persisting despite systematic dehumanization. They develop their own hierarchies and support systems, sharing information about masters' preferences, warning of dangers, offering comfort after particularly difficult nights. Romance sometimes bloomed between them, though such relationships were dangerous. Masters might find them threatening or amusing, either response potentially harmful. Yet love persisted, expressed in glances, brief touches, and whispered conversations in languages their masters didn't understand. The Senator Aurelius, now in his 50s, begins showing signs of illness. The household holds its breath, knowing that his death will mean upheaval for everyone, but especially for his companions. Roman law is unclear about inheriting human property of this type. They might go to his son, be sold to pay debts, or be freed in his will if he's feeling generous or guilty. The uncertainty creates constant anxiety, made worse by the need to continue serving a dying man whose moods grow increasingly unpredictable. As weeks pass and the senator's condition worsens, strange dynamics emerge. He calls for his first companion, the Greek, and they spend hours in conversation. Not the usual one-sided discourse, but actual dialogue. As if approaching death has temporarily erased the barriers between master and slave. The Greek later reports that Aurelius expressed regret not for owning companions, but for not appreciating art and philosophy more, even facing mortality. The senator cannot fully recognize the humanity of those he's exploited. The will, when read, contains surprises. The Greek receives freedom and a small pension, reward for years of service. 2 other longtime companions are to be sold, but only to approved buyers, who will treat them well. A meaningless gesture since no oversight exists. The boy who was Marcus and others are inherited by the senator's son, who accepts them with visible discomfort. The household's future uncertain. Everyone understands that change is coming, though whether for better or worse remains unknown. The transition to a new master reveals how much companions' lives depend on individual personality. Within an exploitative system, the senator's son, raised to see this as normal, struggles with the reality of ownership. He reduces the number of companions, selling some to other households, keeping only those he feels obligated to maintain. His treatment is less demanding, but also less predictable. Ignorance can be as dangerous as cruelty when absolute power is involved. Archaeological excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum provide frozen moments of these lives. A room, clearly designed for a companion, contains personal items, a hidden charm from a non-Roman religion, tablets with practice writing, a small knife that might have been for self-defense or self-harm. The volcanic ash preserved details that would otherwise be lost. The quality of bedding, fine but not luxurious. The books allowed poetry and music, no philosophy or history. The view from the window facing an interior courtyard, never the street where freedom walked. Modern trafficking patterns show disturbing parallels to Roman practices. The selection of victims based on perceived market value. The psychological conditioning to ensure compliance. The economic systems that profit from human misery all echo across centuries. The terminology changes, the justifications evolve, but the fundamental exploitation remains remarkably consistent. Understanding historical systems helps recognize contemporary versions, hiding behind different facades. The boy who was Marcus, now 19 and nearing the age when his value will decline, makes a desperate choice. He's learned that the senator's son plans to sell several companions to fund political ambitions, rather than face unknown masters. He offers to train new boys for the household, leveraging his years of experience. It's not freedom, but it's survival with slightly more autonomy. The proposal is accepted, and he finds himself in the surreal position of teaching others to endure what he's suffered. Training others while remembering his own breaking creates psychological conflicts he never anticipated. He wants to prepare them for reality while not crushing their spirits entirely. He finds himself repeating words he once hated, enforcing rules he despises, becoming part of the system that destroyed him. Yet he also provides subtle kindnesses his trainers never offered, warnings about specific dangers, techniques for psychological survival, reminders that they are more than their circumstances suggest. The economic shift in the later empire affected the companion trade significantly. As Rome's expansion slowed, the supply of captured youth decreased while demand remained constant, driving prices higher. This made companions even more exclusive to the ultra-wealthy, increasing both their value and vulnerability. Documentation from this period shows elaborate contracts detailing specific services and conditions, suggesting a formalization of practices that had previously operated through unwritten understanding. Religious changes in the empire brought new dynamics, but not liberation. Early Christian writers condemned the practice while often employing euphemisms that suggest it continued among converts. The rise of mystery cults provided some companions with spiritual communities that offered psychological escape, if not physical freedom. Yet institutional Christianity, once established, proved capable of similar exploitations under different justifications, suggesting the problem lay not in specific religions, but in power structures themselves. The story of one particular companion survives through unusual circumstances. A cache of personal letters, hidden in a wall and discovered centuries later, documents years of correspondence between a boy taken from Britannia and somehow, miraculously, his sister who learned his location. The letters, written in their native language and smuggled through sympathetic traders, reveal a full human being beneath the role forced upon him, his memories of home, his struggles to maintain identity, his advice to his sister to never let herself be taken alive if Romans come. The correspondence ends abruptly. We never learn his fate. The gradual transformation of the empire affected these practices in complex ways. As barbarian peoples gained power within Roman structures, some brought different attitudes towards sexuality and slavery. Yet rather than eliminating the system, they often simply became new participants, adopting Roman practices as symbols of civilization and status. The exploitation continued under new management, suggesting how deeply embedded these patterns had become in the structure of power itself. The final years of the Western Empire saw the companion system fragment rather than formally end. Economic collapse made maintaining expensive slaves impractical for many. Social chaos provided opportunities for escape that had never existed before. Yet documentation from the Eastern Empire shows the practice continuing for centuries more, adapted to new cultural contexts, but maintaining its essential character. The boy's suffering transcended the rise and fall of specific empires. In the household once owned by Senator Aurelius, now managed by his grandson, the last of the original companions, reaches an age where his presence becomes embarrassing rather than entertaining. The current master, facing financial difficulties, cannot afford sentiment. The aging man who was once the boy Marcus faces sale to whatever buyer will pay. His years of service, his expertise in training others, his loyalty through 3 generations. Of the family, none of it matters. He is property, and property that has outlived its purpose must be disposed of. Yet sometimes, rarely, humanity breaks through. A freedman who remembers kindness from years past purchases the aging companion, not for exploitation, but from genuine gratitude. The rescue is quiet, unofficial, the kind of action that leaves no historical record, but changes individual lives completely. The man who was Marcus finds himself free for the first time since childhood. Though freedom at 50 carries different meaning than it would have at 15, he has no family, no homeland to return to, no skills beyond those taught for others' pleasure, but he has survived and survival itself is a form of victory. The archaeological record provides one final, poignant detail. A tombstone from the period, unusual in its elaboration for someone of no official status, bears an inscription. Here lies one who was many things to many people, but in the end was himself. No name, no dates, no family listed, yet someone cared enough to ensure he was remembered, even if anonymously. The stone's existence suggests that despite systematic dehumanization, connections formed that transcended the brutal categories of Roman society. Modern scholarship continues uncovering evidence of these lives, each fragment adding detail to a picture Rome never intended to preserve. Graffiti expressing longing for distant homes, medical texts describing trauma in clinical language, legal documents revealing the vast economics of human trafficking. Together they witness suffering that demanded to be forgotten but refuses to disappear entirely. These boys and young men, whose names were stolen along with their freedom, deserve recognition not as historical footnotes, but as human beings who endured unimaginable circumstances while maintaining whatever dignity they could preserve. The legacy of Rome's companion system extends beyond individual suffering to fundamental questions about civilization itself. How could a society that produced magnificent art, architecture, and law also institutionalize such systematic exploitation? The answer lies not in Roman uniqueness, but in human capacity for compartmentalization, for creating categories of people deemed less human, for justifying oppression through economic necessity or cultural tradition. These patterns persist, manifesting differently across cultures and centuries, but maintaining consistent core dynamics. Education about this history matters not for sensationalism, but for recognition and prevention. Understanding how economic systems created demand for human trafficking, how legal structures enabled exploitation, how social norms normalized abuse. This knowledge helps identify similar patterns. In contemporary contexts, the boys whose lives were stolen to serve Roman pleasure represent countless others throughout history, whose stories remain untold, whose suffering was deemed acceptable by societies that should have protected them. The final image from this dark chapter of human history should not be of suffering but of resilience. Despite everything designed to break them, many survived. Despite systematic dehumanization, they maintained humanity. Despite having everything stolen, they found ways to resist, to connect, to preserve something of themselves that no master could own. Their legacy lies not in the exploitation they endured, but in their proof that human dignity, while it can be suppressed and violated, can never be completely destroyed.